547 Goddamn Religion. Afterword. Muhammad and Allah speak. The 5 volumes of Goddamn Religion, Snake, Satanic, Submission, Slaughter, and Sunnah&Suratan provide a comprehensive, contextual, and chronological review of Islam, starting with the religion's rendition of creation and ending with the terror it inspired. These volumes bring Islam's 5 earliest and most trusted sources together, putting their words and deeds into the context of time and place to expose what the dogma's founder had to say about his cravings, ambitions, religions, and gods. There is no better way to understand Muhammad, Allah, and the Quran, or to evaluate their legacy. When reviewing the primary papers of any dogma, we must be mindful that context comes in several forms. Up to this point, we have striven to evaluate the evidence chronologically. Further, throughout the comprehensive evaluations of the Quran, I have been mindful of the context of proximity, presenting each recital as a collective whole rather than removing particular statements from the context of the Suratan. This known, there is also a topical appendix. In this case, similar themes are brought together and organized by subject. All 3 forms of context provide clarity. The Quran fails on all 3 counts. The recitals lack any semblance of chronology, as they are a jumbled mess individually and collectively. Allah's suratans fail to provide the context of place, participants, and time. Adjacent verses are typically unrelated and often contradictory, while at the same time strewn together without proper transitions. 548 inches the early surahs, there is a preoccupation with railing against Muhammad's critics and with describing Allah's torments, but the rejections and condemnations are tossed haphazardly through the text. This is also true of the later surahs and their fixation on submit and obey, bow and pay, fight and kill, or burn in hell. Yes, these are themes, and they are repetitive, but they are not presented in a cogent manner. The Quran's failures in this regard dictate goddamn religion's length, order, and format. The narrative and chronological hadith compiled by Ishaq and Tabari were required to provide the Quran with the context of chronology and circumstance that it otherwise lacked. Then Bukharis and Muslims' topical hadith were used to explain important themes. Therefore, Muhammad's message has never been as clear as it is in these pages. Unfortunately for humankind, unmasked, his message is repulsive, even terrorizing. But that is precisely what makes this study essential reading for God's people. The topical appendix isn't the best way to learn about Islam's Rasulullah or to understand the ungod's Quranic recital. However, this categorization is an effective way to evaluate certain aspects of their religion. This format facilitates the study of important themes from various perspectives. Their relative significance can be evaluated based upon the volume of material relegated to them. So, for your edification and convenience, this topical appendix collates nearly 3,000 quotes from the Quran, Sirah, Tariq, and Hadith under subject headings like fighting, terrorism, war, jihad, martyrs, murder, torture, thievery, deception, intolerance, Jews, women, demons, lust, racism, and stupidity. In contrast to the contents of the preceding volumes of Goddamn Religion, the topical appendix ends with Islamic science and begins by focusing on the expressions of fighting and terrorism. They represent the dogma's 549 least understood and most lethal pronouncements. I trust you'll find this endeavor as sobering as it is enlightening. Every citation in the topical appendix was originally recorded in one of Islam's prime sources, the Sirah, biography, Tariq, history, Hadith, report, or Quran, recital. They are all properly attested and documented. Each quote fell from Muhammad's lips, whether as part of a Suratan or as Sunnah. Each quotation was passed along to us by the same group of men using the same means, oral reports, which became hearsay. The message was the same no matter the source because Muhammad and Allah were exceedingly similar, with the Rasulullah being the corporeal manifestation of his rabbi, equally sadistic and psychotic. Ishaq Sirat Rasul Allah provides the lone account of Muhammad's life and the formation of Islam written within 200 years of the Prophet's death. It is a hadith collection comprised of oral reports from Muhammad and his companions. There is no earlier or more accurate source. While the character, message, and deeds portrayed within its pages are horrific, the Sirah's chronological presentation is indispensable to Islam. The Quran can't be understood or followed without it. The Tariq is the oldest, most trusted, and comprehensive history of Islam's formation in Muhammad's example, called Sunnah. It was compiled by Al-Tabari. His history of Al-Tabari is formatted chronologically. It begins with Islamic creation and ends with the acts of Muhammad's companions. Tabari also composed Islam's most revered Tafsir commentary on the Quran, making him the dogma's first scholar. His history serves to explain Allah's recitals and Muhammad's Sunnah through a compilation of hadith. The most revered topical collection of early Islamic traditions was compiled by Bukhari. His categorical 550 listing of approved hadith was arranged under important Islamic themes, such as jihad, expeditions, booty, tricks, taxes, blood money, punishment, going potty, prostration, and predestination, making it similar to the topical appendix with some exceptions. He did not include Quran citations while we did. And while he provides ample hadith to populate the category, Bukhari was remiss in not including a compilation under stupidity. To confirm the validity of the Islamic sources quoted herein, consider what one of the most venerated scholars, Muhammad Khan in his 1997 translation of Sahih Bukhari, wrote in the preface of the revered Sunnah. The Quran is one leg of two which form the basis of Islam. The second is the Sunnah of the Prophet. What makes the Quran different from the Sunnah is its form. The Quran is quite literally the word of Allah, whereas the Sunnah, which is comprised of ahadith, was inspired by Allah but the wording and actions are the Prophet's. Bukhari is a collection of sayings and deeds of Prophet Muhammad, also known as the Sunnah. The reports of the Prophet's sayings and deeds are called hadith. Bukhari lived a couple of centuries after the Prophet's death and collected his hadith. Each report was checked for compatibility with the Quran, and the veracity of the chain of reporters had to be established. Since translations of the Quran are wildly divergent due to the remedial nature of the text, I began by presenting a thoughtful composite of the 5 most commonly cited representations to convey its message. And while these included the Noble Quran, Pickthall, Shakir, and Yusuf Ali translations along with the Ahmed Ali paraphrase, I favored the more literal, expansive, and expressive word-for-word readings found in the Noble Quran. It was translated by Muhammad Muzzin Khan for Maktaba Dr. Salem Publishers in coordination with the King Fahd National Library. Midway through these volumes, I transitioned to using 551 Quran interlinears to convey the suratans more literally and accurately because it became apparent that the Islamic scholars were cooking the books in an attempt to make their wannabe God appear lucid and credible. But even that wasn't enough to uncover the truth about Allah. So in the concluding volumes, I invested the time to examine every word using Arabic lexicons and dictionaries, while contemplating their Hebrew roots, to render the Quran as the words, themselves, dictate. The oldest Quran fragments date to 725 CE, a century after they were allegedly recited, when the contents were in a state of flux and still evolving. A comprehensive analysis of these findings and the book's history is presented in the opening chapter of Volume 2 of God Damn Religion, and again in the opening chapter of Sunnah&Suratan, entitled Islam's Dark Past. One of the more interesting assessments of the Quran's formative years was written by the world's foremost authority on Quranic paleography, Dr. Gerd R. Puen, for The Atlantic magazine in 1999. He said, "The Quran is a cocktail of texts that were not all understood even at the time of Muhammad. Many of them may even be 100 years older than Islam itself. Even within the Islamic traditions, there is a huge body of contradictory information, including a significant Christian substrate, from which one can derive a whole Islamic anti-history. The Quran claims for itself that it is mubin, or clear, but if you look at it, you will notice that every 5th sentence or so simply doesn't make sense. Many Muslims will tell you otherwise, of course, but the fact is that a 5th of the Quranic text is just incomprehensible. This is what has caused the traditional anxiety regarding translation. If the Quran is not comprehensible, if it can't even be understood in Arabic, then it's not translatable. People fear that. And since the Quran claims repeatedly to be clear but obviously is not, as even speakers of Arabic will tell 552 you, there is a contradiction. Something else must be going on. Beyond the stunningly deficient standard of Allah's communication, the Quran also lacks the organizational structure of context and chronology. It, therefore, must be read in conjunction with the chronological hadith collections of Ishaq and Tabari to be understood. And to that end, God Damn Religion was composed using this approach. The Sirat Rasul Allah was compiled by Ibn Ishaq in 750 CE. It was edited and abridged by Ibn Hisham in 830 CE and translated by Alfred Guillaume under the title, The Life of Muhammad in 1955 by Oxford Press. Referred to as the Sirah, or biography, Ishaq's hadith collection is comprised of oral reports from Muhammad and his companions. It provides the only written account of Muhammad's life and the formation of Islam that was composed within 2 centuries of the Prophet's death. There is no earlier or more accurate source. The history of Al-Tabari, called the Tariq, was compiled by Abu Muhammad bin Al-Tabari between 870 and 920 CE. His monumental work was translated and published from 1987 through 1997 by the State University of New York Press. I quote from volumes 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Tabari's history is comprised entirely of Islamic hadith. It is arranged chronologically. Tabari is Islam's oldest and censored source. Al-Bukhari's hadith, titled Sahih al-Bukhari, The True Traditions, was arranged by Islamic scholar Imam Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari between 840 and 860 CE. I have quoted from the 9-volume original English translation by Dr. Muhammad Muzzin Khan, the director of the Islamic University, Al-Medina. It was published by Maktaba Dar es Salaam in Saudi Arabia at the King Fahd National Library in July 1997. However, since the 553 nomenclature cataloging Bukhari's hadith varies between the printed and digital presentations, I have used the more prevalent online nomenclature. Imam Bukhari reviewed some 600,000 hadith traditions and distilled them down to 7,563 full isnad, chain of hearsay reporters, narrations of which he was certain were sahih authentic. Paired of duplications and contrasting accounts of the same episode, there are 2,600 hadith in his collection, each shedding light on Muhammad, Allah, the Quran, and the formation of Islam. Muhammad al-Bukhari began his research in the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca before moving to the Al-Masjid an-Nabawi in Medina, establishing the final collection in 846 CE, 232 AH, where it was examined and verified by the most celebrated Islamic scholars of the day. The oldest surviving partial copy of his manuscript dates to 984 CE/340 AH, and a complete copy is dated to 1155 CE/550 AH. Sahih Muslim, a 9th century topical hadith arrangement of Sunnah, was collected by Persian scholar Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj al-Nazaburi. He required an unbroken chain of reporters, or isnads, at least 2 of whom were contemporaries of Muhammad, to consider the tradition. He reduced some 300,000 oral reports emerging from the messenger's companions down to 4,000. The subsequent hadith collection is compiled into 56 books and presents 3,033 independent narratives. His collection was translated by Nazanuddin al-Kitab for publication by Maktaba Dar es Salaam in Saudi Arabia for the King Fahd National Library. An online version was retranslated and prepared by Abdul Hamid Siddiqui and converted to an electronic database by the DVU Group as inspired by the dedicated work done by the Muslim Students Association at the University of Southern California. It is interesting to note that in Muslim-majority nations, young people invest a quarter of their school day reciting the Quran rather than learning to read or 554 understand it. They are drilled in mouthing its sounds in the arcane, inadequate, and odd dialect of religious Arabic. As a result, they can be fooled into believing that it's God's book, and that it was written intelligently since they have no idea what the words actually mean. So, they can be indoctrinated and turned into human bombs when it serves Islam's interests. If Muslims were to shed their yoke of ignorance, they would discover that the reason those who control them, suppress them, fleece them, and abuse them want them deceived is that the actual message contained in the Quran is horrendous. It is more intolerant, racist, punitive, and violent than Hitler's Mein Kampf. Quite simply, the religion is a death cult intent upon human annihilation. Anyone, including Muslims, who have done as I have, would also discover that the Quran is inanely expressed. There are countless meaningless words, foreign words, and missing words, which is why translations differ so significantly. Everyone is left guessing as to what Muhammad thought Allah was trying to say. And the closer one looks, the worse the fraud appears. By any rational, moral, academic, or literary standard, the Quran is the worst book ever written. As noted, the Quran is a jumbled mess without context, chronology, or rational transitions. It is only by rearranging its verbal diarrhea in the order it was vomited and infusing it with the context of the chronological hadith narratives that the recitals even approach something comprehensible. But by so doing, it becomes obvious that the Quran was little more than a reflection of Satan's ambition and Muhammad's demented character and depraved ideas. The more one knows, the more they despise the fraud Muhammad perpetrated on his fellow Arabs and then on humankind. To know the Quran is to reject Islam with prejudice. 555 The topical appendix is not designed to replace the analysis preceding it. It is an aid for those who have read goddamn religion. Every quotation within it is also presented chronologically in snake, satanic, within the context of Muhammad's life or within the Suratan from which it was derived. And in the flow of the preceding volumes, they are reviewed in juxtaposition to their adjacent passages. Finding the page upon which a hadith from Ishaq or Tabari is covered is thus relatively simple since their authors observed a strict chronology. The higher the page number or volume, the later you'll find the reference in goddamn religion. Henceforth, you'll find a list of categories and their respective citations. Many quotes have been abridged so that non-topical material doesn't clutter the subject being addressed. Most of my explanatory comments have been removed, so I strongly encourage you to read goddamn religion prior to using the topical appendix. Also, since the purpose of the topical appendix of Mohammedanisms and Allahisms is only to elucidate their positions on a variety of subjects, if citing the Quran apart from this analysis, it is best to reference the more complete and more exacting renderings presented within the comprehensive review of the Suratans throughout goddamn religion. Continue reading.